You should have already completed the ed puzzle that goes with compare and contrast, and so we are going to go on to cause and effect right now. Now your student notes should already have compare and contrast filled in, so now you're going to add cause and effect. And your second page of notes, when you open it up, should have all of this information filled in, the questions to ask, the signal words, and then yours should have a Venn diagram that was showing a compare and contrast between email and postal mail. And so we're going to do the same thing with cause and effect, the questions, the signal words, and then we're going to read a passage and come up with a graphic organizer to help organize the information. Now, cause and effect is another text structure that I know you've worked with in the past. When we look at a passage that's organized with cause and effect, we're looking at the questions, what happened, why did it happen, and what happened as a result of that event. And so some signal words we would look for are because, as a result, so, since, however, if this happened, then this other thing happened, due to, or consequently. So when we think of cause and effect, the cause has to come first. And in the timeline of events, something happens, something occurs, you forgot to study for a test, then the effect is you don't do very well. When we write about it, however, or when we read about it, sometimes the effect comes first. So I might say, I didn't do well on my test because I forgot to study. Or I could flip it around. I didn't study. As a result, I didn't do well on my test. So we really have to think logically about what occurs and what happens as a result of that. So graphically, we have a couple of different ways that we could just kind of list the information. I like to use arrows. That kind of shows which happened first and what happens next. We also sometimes have one cause that has multiple effects, or multiple causes having one effect. And so there's no one right or wrong way to organize information. It's really going to be based on the passage and the text of what you're reading. So here's my example. It says, in the last election, fewer than half of all Americans of voting age actually voted. Due to the lack of participation in the voting process, this has led to many unintended consequences. Politicians are more likely to campaign directly to narrow factions of the public and to stress very specific issues relevant to those factions. And a faction is a small group of somebody. As a result, issues that concern the greater non-voting public may never be addressed. So taking a look at your notes that you copied down, or you should have copied down, see if you can't find two of the signal words in here, the signals that help us identify a cause and an effect. So I found due to and as a result. So in the last column now, let's find a way to organize this information. I like to think that since the cause comes first, I'm going to write it first and then draw an arrow to the effect. So one of the causes they talked about was the lack of participation due to the lack of participation in the voting process. So using the signal word helps me identify the information that I want. So now I have to think, well, what happened because there was a lack of participation in the voting process? Politicians are more likely to campaign directly to narrow factions or groups of the public and to stress very specific issues relevant to those factions. If I wanted to put a signal word in between those, I could say lack of participation in the voting process. There was a lack of participation in the voting process, so politicians are more likely to campaign directly. Now, there was another cause and effect, and what we found here is that this effect actually became its own cause. Politicians are more likely to campaign directly to narrow factions or groups of the public. The effect is that issues that concern the greater non-voting public may never be addressed. So again, consequently, this is what happens. Because the politicians don't campaign to everybody, consequently, issues that concern the greater non-voting public may never be addressed. Okay, so again, your cause comes first, and your effect. I could switch that around if I wanted to when I'm writing, but when I think about organizing it in a way that makes it easy for me to remember, I like to put the cause and then the effect and put some type of signal word in between them to show their connection. Okay, so your notes should be all filled out now for cause and effect.